Hey guys, I hope you're doing well. This lecture video is going to be on evolution. So we're going to talk about what is evolution, who developed a theory on how evolution occurs, and the mechanism for evolution. So what mechanism or driving force controls evolution? So evolution is the change in inherited traits of a population over time. So there's two key words in this definition: inherited traits. So that means traits that you receive from your parents or in the form of genes or DNA. And then of a population over time. So it's important to know that it's populations that evolve, not individuals. So evolution is occurring throughout populations. And then natural selection is going to be the mechanism of evolution. So natural selection is going to be the driving force of evolution. And natural selection is survival of the fitter. So you may have seen natural selection as survival of the fittest, but as we talk about evolution, you're going to find that some organisms are able to actually survive that are not the fittest in the population. It just by chance they're still able to thrive in that environment, and so it's called survival. The better definition of natural selection is actually survival of the fitter, because not every organism in that population, or not all populations of organisms here, are going to be the fittest. We're not making perfect organisms. All right, so some important notes about evolution. First thing is individuals don't evolve, but populations do. So there's going to be a change in the genes of a population over many generations, not certain individuals. And then number two, only inherited traits. Or those traits that are passed to offspring via genes are going to be involved in evolution, not learned traits or things that you might learn from your parents. And the third thing, which I've already mentioned, is that evolution does not produce perfect organisms. It's actually driven by environmental conditions. So that's why we changed the definition of natural selection a little bit to be survival of the fitter rather than survival of the fittest, because it is not going to make perfect organisms. Some of those organisms that might not be as fit will still be able to pass on their genes and produce offspring that will have the same traits that they do. So in the next generation, you will end up with organisms that may not be as fit as other organisms that have evolved. And like I said, it's driven by environmental conditions. All right, so this is Charles Darwin. He was English, so that's why I put the British flag up here. And he actually studied at the University of Edinburgh. He got into med school in Scotland, but then changed his mind and went to Cambridge to be a minister. And then he boarded a ship and took the voyage of the Beagle, which was in 1831 to 1836. At age 22, he noticed the diversity of organisms in the Galapagos Islands. So this is where just one of the places that the HMS Beagle actually went. And so he stopped off at the Galapagos Islands and he noticed the diversity, how so many different organisms had formed. And so he wrote The Origin of Species, which you can see here, in 1859, and that has actually been the most influential book in biology. This here is a picture of the Galapagos Islands, absolutely gorgeous. What's really unique about these islands is that each island has different topography, and so each island is a little bit different based on the vegetation and climate, what type of vegetation might be found there. Does it get a lot of rain? Does it not? There's so many little islands here. They're all very different. And that does play a factor into the diversity of the species that are found in the Galapagos Islands. After studying these organisms in the Galapagos Islands, he actually termed evolution the descent with modification. So basically, as we descend, or as our genes descend, as we produce offspring, we have slight modifications that make them more fit for their environment. So descent with modification was the first term for evolution, and that was a term that Charles Darwin used to describe evolution. So what type of data did Darwin collect on his voyage? He collected 3 types. Remember that this was in 1831 to 1836. So he collected fossil evidence, he also collected anatomical data, so he looked at the different anatomy of the organisms, particularly finches. If you look at finches, there's a video that I'll have you watch, and you can actually look at the different anatomy based on their beak size will be different based on which type of food that they eat. So if you have a very robust beak, then you're probably going to eat cactus fruit, things like that. If you have a very small beak, you're probably going to eat smaller seeds. So the anatomical data of the organisms was important. And then he also looked at geographical data. So he noticed that certain organisms on different islands, the different islands that they were on actually affected some of their anatomical structures. So they looked a little bit different. They had different structures based on which island they were found on, which is kind of cool. And that is due to the geography there of or geographical data of the or landscape basically of the island. So was it flat? Was it a flat island? You know, was it very mountainous, volcanic? Did it have sandy beaches, or was it rock cliffs? Things like that. So I have my seated groups do a Darwin's Finch's beak game. And what I do is I walk around with some beans. You can try this at home. You can, if you have children, you can play it with your children. If you have a significant other, you can play it with them if you like. But I give everyone a set of beans, just like kidney beans or lima beans. It doesn't matter as long as they're like little beans. And I tell them that's their seed. And then I walk around the room and give out a clothespin, and I give out a set of tweezers. And each person in the group gets one or the other. And in 60 seconds, you have 60 seconds to collect as much seed as you can. And depending on how much seed you get depends on whether you survive to pass on your genes to your offspring. So after we do that, usually it looks something like this. Usually people that have the tweezers get about 20 beans. Some of them maybe get 15, 17. If you get somebody that's really, really fit, I always crack the joke that they're really fit. The ladies or men in the room should check out this organism because it's very, very fit here, collected the most. But you can see the tweezers have a pretty high number of seed that they were able to collect based on their beak type. Over here, the clothespins, unfortunately, don't fare as well. So typically 5, somebody might get 8. That would probably be the most fit organism here. 3, and then maybe somebody got 4. So if you didn't get 5, then you did not live. These 2 organisms here didn't live to be able to reproduce. They didn't have enough seed to be able to reproduce and pass on their clothespin beak to their offspring. So here you can see all the tweezers got well over 5, right? They all have well over 5. So all those organisms are going to pass on their tweezer-like beak to their offspring. They're going to be able to reproduce and pass that on. These clothespins over here, while that's not a lot of food, they're probably not going to be the healthiest organisms. They still got 5 or more, so they're going to be able to reproduce, and they're going to pass on their clothespin beak to their offspring. So in the next generation, you're going to have more tweezers and less clothespins, beak types, right? Do you see how natural selection is survival of the fitter, which would be the tweezers here, right? And then, but it's not survival of the fittest because we didn't actually knock out all of the clothespins. Some of these organisms, by chance, are still going to be able to live to reproduce, and pass on their clothespin beak to their offspring. I hope this example has really helped you guys with evolution. Like I said, you're welcome to try this game at home. You can get the whole family involved and everybody can be a Darwin's Finch. I will tell you that I tell my students they're not allowed to scoop the beans, so you can't scoop the beans. And you have to use the clothespins like you would if you were like to pin, a piece of clothing with a clothespin. You can't, a lot of students like to flip them around and try to use them the other way, and it does work better, but that's not the point of the game. All right, so what is natural selection? We've talked about natural selection and how it's survival of the fitter. Hopefully the last slide helps you to see that. There are a lot of really good videos that I've also posted in this folder for you, so please look at those. There are certain mechanisms. So natural selection is a mechanism of evolution, but then there's mechanisms of natural selection as well. Your book talks about these. The first is genetic drift. Genetic drift is going to be a change in the gene pool due to chance. So we may have changes in the gene pool due to a certain disease in a small population that might wipe some of the organisms out. So that would be an example of genetic drift. The next one is bottleneck effect. So this is 1, 2. The bottleneck effect is when the population size is reduced for at least one generation. This can be due to many different factors, environmental factors, predation, things like that. But it's when the bottleneck effect is when that kind of like a bottleneck, you go from having a larger number and then it bottlenecks into a smaller number in the individuals in the population. 3 is the founder's effect or the founder effect. This is when a new colony is started. That's what the founder portion of this mechanism is referring to. When a new colony is started by a few members of an original larger population. So a large population breaks off, we form a new colony, this population lives elsewhere, and it's going to be the smaller population is going to be affected differently, maybe by their environmental factors, and evolution will be different in that smaller population than it will in the larger population. And then 4 here is sexual selection. So that's when individuals in a population are more likely to attract mates and have more offspring. So this is all about reproducing, passing on your genes to your offspring. So if you are more likely to attract a mate, you have a better chance of producing more offspring. And then the last one, 5 here, is gene flow. And this is when individuals migrate into or immigrate out of a population. So an example here would be like humans, for example. As we modernize, we were previously isolated, but as technology has increased, populations will actually be able to meet and mate and interchange genes, and that's going to make the human population more uniform. For example, thanks to airplanes, I can get on a plane and go visit my fiance in Scotland. He can come visit me. He's actually going to be moving here to the US. And then our relationship was made possible thanks to FaceTime. I have Apple to thank for that. And I'm not really sure that our relationship would have worked out if we hadn't been able to talk to each other every day with this technology. And so, we probably wouldn't have met and exchange genes. So, when we have our offspring, it's going to be a combination of my genes and then also of his Scottish genes. So, the world is becoming a much smaller place thanks to technology, and that means that gene flow is occurring in the human population, making the human population more uniform as we start to share more of our genes and we become less isolated from each other. All right, so here are some examples of evolution. There are some really good videos, like I said, on Blackboard, but here you can see that depending on, this is Africa, and depending on where the giraffes are located, so these are giraffe coloration patterns. And you can see some are more orangey, some have big blotches, some are much smaller, broken up. But here you can see that depending on where they're actually located, so here we have the West African, it's actually also the northernmost, South African way down here, And you can see how their coloration patterns are very different based on where they live. And that's because they need to blend in to their environment. So their colorations will be different based on their environment. But if you look here, you can see that they all came from one common ancestor. So as they have moved to these different regions, these populations have moved to different regions of Africa, they have developed different patterns, coloration patterns, to better blend in with their environment. And that's going to increase their fitness, right? That's going to increase their likelihood of survival and being able to pass those on to their offspring. And then over here, if you watch the video, they'll talk about this Picta. This is the original population here. Notice it's in northern most California. And what's happened is this Picta version, these are all subspecies, but this Picta organism has actually moved down along the coast and then over here on the valley. So they stayed away from the mountain ranges here. But depending on whether they moved down the coast or whether they moved to the valley, sorry guys, it affected their coloration patterns. So here, these individuals are actually trying to mimic, both of these are trying to mimic the rough-skinned newt, which is red. So they're trying to do warning coloration. They're trying to mimic those organisms that are poisonous, like the rough-skinned newt. And so these organisms that went down along the valley here, they're actually trying to blend in more with their environment. And then you also can have organisms that are going to be hybrid between the two. And those probably aren't going to be very good at blending in with their environment, and they're not going to be very good at having a warning coloration. So it's not likely that those populations will be able to survive very well. But you can see that the coloration pattern as this Picta subspecies moved down into different parts of California, depending on environmental factors that changed their coloration patterns over many generations. The ones that went along the coast became red to mimic the rough-skinned newt that's poisonous, and the ones that went along the valley decided to, well, they don't decide it, but through natural selection and evolution, they have change their coloration patterns to blend in with their environment more. Then you can have microevolution. So here you can see that there has been a genetic mutation in these individuals that have changed their color patterns to brown rather than gray, as you can see in the other bunnies here. And microevolution is a generation to generation change in the gene pool. So this is evolution occurring at the smallest scale. This gene here, the red gene, is the gene that's more favored in the population, and this is due to its environment. So maybe the brown actually helps these organisms blend in more to their environment. So this has been a beneficial mutation that's occurred. And so in generation 1, you have 2 of these organisms, and then you have microevolution. So generation 2, you end up with 3. Generation 3, you end up with 4. And so you can see that throughout several generations, we've increased the number of these organisms, this gene that's more favored in the population, but it's a slow and gradual increase, and that's microevolution. This is probably my favorite example of evolution due to changes in the environment. So these blobs that you see here, these are actually jellyfish. They're called golden jellyfish. Or jellies. They've actually preferred scientists to use the term jellyfish because they're not technically fish. Anyways, they're in Lake Palau. It's in the Indo-Pacific. It's a saltwater lake. So here's the lake itself. It is saltwater. If you look out here, you can actually see this is the ocean here. And what's happened is this is a saltwater lake that has small tunnels that get flushed by the tide. So when the tide rises, tide comes in, there are little tunnels inside this vegetation here that the water from the ocean is going to come on in to the lake. And so it's a saltwater lake. So over time, this lake has formed, but at one time it was all ocean. And so what's happened are these jellyfish here have stinging cells. So most jellies have stinging cells. They're called nematocysts. And this is what people are usually afraid of, whenever they don't want to come in contact with the jelly because they do hurt when they sting you. And so what has occurred, it's a mechanism to get rid of predators, like to deter predators, right? So as they've become enclosed, the jellies have become enclosed in this lake here, they're isolated from their predators. So their predators can't get in through these like tunnels that have formed. And so they no longer have the need to produce these stinging cells or nematocysts because they don't have any predators. So you're just wasting energy at that point making these stinging cells when you're not even going to use them because you don't have any predators. So over many generations, as these jellyfish have reproduced, they've actually lost their stinging cells. They've lost their ability to sting. And so that's why these two people here are able to swim amongst all these jellyfish and not get stung, which is pretty cool. This is due to, so the mechanism here would be habitat isolation, because they're isolated from their predators. They don't have to extend energy to make these stinging cells. It's $100 if you would like to go do this. You can go snorkel with them. You cannot scuba dive. The lake actually is stratified, so there's like multiple layers, and the bottom layer of the lake is anoxic, or there's no oxygen there, so you're not allowed to scuba dive, but you can snorkel. The top layers are fine. But you do have to stay in the top 15 meters there. And the last thing I'll say is, while this is cool and all, I actually looked into going to do this because I think it's pretty neat. But there have been several saltwater crocodile deaths that have occurred. So I don't think I'll be going anytime soon. Coevolution is so awesome. This is when a species evolves in response to another species. So these populations are evolving in response to each other. This is typically going to be seen in predator-prey relationships. So the example I have for you here is, this is the garter snake. It's non-venomous. And this is the rough skin newt. It is poisonous. So it secretes this toxin. It's called tetrodotoxin. Here, let me redo that. It's the same toxin that's found in jellyfish. And this guy could, it'll try to bite you, but it would be fine. It's not venomous. You can touch it, but if you were to eat it or ingest it or ingest the toxin, so if you touched it and then you licked your hand or whatnot, it would actually cause death in humans. It is there's a large concentration of toxin. It is probably one of the most deadly organisms on the planet. And humans have died from this. So there have been several cases where people have dared other people to eat these, and they have died because what happens is this tetrodotoxin is so concentrated in this particular organism, and it starts to shut down the respiratory muscles, and then basically you end up with multiple organ failure after that. So it's highly dangerous, highly deadly, but not to humans because we're not typically eating it. Now, if we were to eat it, like I said, you would die. But the garter snake doesn't have an issue with this because it has actually built up a resistance to the toxin, and that's why the rough-skinned newt has such high levels of toxicity. It's very concentrated toxin, and that's because it has to secrete more and more toxin over generations in order to keep up with the resistance of the garter snake. So as the rough-skinned newt becomes more toxic, the garter snake continues to develop a resistance to the toxin. And so over many, many generations and over time, these two populations have evolved in response to each other. The rough-skinned newt has evolved more toxin, and the garter snake has evolved more resistance to the toxin. Some garter snakes are more resistant than others, and there are trade-offs for having resistance to the toxin. So if you are a garter snake that has a high resistance, then you are slower on average. You're a slower snake on average when you don't have any toxin present in the body, as compared to a garter snake that does not have as high of a resistance, which means that you can eat. So if you have high resistance, that means that you can eat rough-skinned newts. You might be slowed a little bit, but not a lot. But you would be more susceptible to your own predators when you don't have any toxin in your body because you're a slower snake. If you have a low resistance to the toxin, and you eat a rough-skinned newt as a garter snake, then you would actually be slowed sometimes even to the point where the snake can't even move for a couple hours, which means you're more susceptible to your predators at that point, right? However, for those couple of hours. However, when you don't have any toxin, if you're a low resistant snake and you don't have any toxin, then you would be able to move faster to get away from your predators without that toxin. So there are some trade-offs to being a resistant snake or having the resistance to the toxin found in the rough-skinned newt. It's a really cool relationship, and this is not the only coevolution response. There are plenty of predator-prey relationships out there where organisms have evolved, or species rather, excuse me, have evolved in response to each other, trying to outsmart each other in the predator-prey relationship. So make sure you watch that video. And that is all I have for you on evolution. So I hope you've enjoyed this lecture video, learned a few really cool things. At least I think they're kind of cool. If you have any questions, just feel free to email me. Thanks, guys.